Very recently, I was applying to multiple different companies to get a role on a tech lead / staff engineer level. And I got hired by Google, so that's great. But during my interviews, I had the pleasure to interview for one company from mobility sector, dealing with cars. It doesn't really matter what they do, but what was interesting about the whole process is they had a really interesting challenge set for people applying for this role. Prepare a short 10-15 minutes presentation on your first 90 days in that company, on that role. And it may be so that very soon you'll see more companies actually approaching interviewing for a tech lead and higher levels roles with the similar tasks or similar, what would you call it, type of questions or challenges. So imagine you got the job. Imagine you start and tell us, what will you do during your first 90 days? This is a really good challenge because what happens is, in order to have prepared a presentation like that, you need to have the soft skills, not only software skills, so to speak. And since I actually got the offer from that company, and I would take it if not for Google, I wanted to share what I did with you guys, because you might as well encounter the same type of question in the wild. So let's start by setting the scene. You're given 15 minutes and a screen. And the question is as vague as it sounds. First 90 days in the company. Make a presentation about that. So, a couple of facts. I was told that this presentation will be the last thing if I get to that stage in interview. So, I could use all of my previous interviews, technical ones, to gather the data to use in that presentation. And that's exactly what I did. And if you're given the same type of a problem, do the same way. Essentially, at the end of every technical interview, and there were 3, there was a little bit of time for your questions, the candidates' questions. So I used the time to gather the information about the company. And I was asking things like, what are your current problems? What are the projects that you are leading or participating in? And people were very open. They would answer. And they told me a couple of things. So essentially what happened, they have a really good, successful business that is well funded. However, they don't have the total ownership of their software. So what happened was they needed a back-end website that takes care of not only customer relationships, but also the back-end part of the process, or business processes, if you like. Ordering, managing people, project phases, and so on and so forth. Plenty of stuff happens behind the scenes that the customer doesn't need to really know about. So essentially they had the software, but they ordered it from a software house, and it was living on the software house's servers. So the number one problem they had is they want to bring that on-prem. They want to build their own team, and they want to build their own software in-house. So that's a proper challenge. A couple of other things I also learned is that they wanted to hire 100 engineers over the next year. Another proper challenge. And that kind of brings me to the presentation. There are multiple things like that I was able to fish during my questions and interviews. I wanted to show you what things you might find if you ask the right questions. Let's get to it. So, what I've done in order to build this presentation is I just opened the Office from Microsoft and I just used the template. Just first one that looked good enough. I didn't think about it twice. Just something that says business, high level, important stuff. And it had a couple of slides with pictures like this one behind me. And I just filled that in. I didn't select the font, didn't line things up, didn't change any single bit. I just used what they gave me. Because, hey, if you ever are going through multiple interviews like that, you don't have time to actually, do all these things, fiddle with it. I did it over a couple of hours and then spent another afternoon thinking about this offline, just I came back and fixed a couple of other things. So we start with this. The car company isn't actually called Lala Cars, it's called something else, but I just changed it so, they can have an actual chance in getting candidates that haven't been biased by this specific thing. And the next slide is about me. So this is a very cool photo of me that was done by a very good friend of mine, Katarzyna. Thank you for that. And a couple of key facts. Just to introduce myself again. They already know all this because they have seen my CV, my resume, and all of that is in there. But there is a slight chance that people who will be listening to this presentation, because there will be multiple persons, not all of them may have read all of it as thorough as I would like. Or maybe there will be some random person joining that haven't seen my resume and they will have questions and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to highlight the most important things, the ones that I'm most proud of. At the time I was engineering tech lead for Cisco. I just completed the book, right? Have you ordered your book about CMake? Go into the description, figure out if you like this book or not. Maybe buy it for a friend. Anyways, moving on. I published a book about CMake, about modern CMake, just now. So I wanted to bring this up. At the point where I was applying, this book was still in the making. I was just wrapping up the final bits. Of course, Tech YouTube. This guys, you watch me, right? Of course. And before that, I wanted to highlight the most important pieces, the most important steps in my career. So I brought up Amazon and I brought Ericsson, where I was a senior engineer, and SDE2 for Amazon as well. And also I wanted to bring up the former entrepreneurship. I had a company back in Poland that was dealing with tech and other things. Why is that important? Because when you get at this higher level roles, tech lead, staff engineer, principal engineer, and all that, you need a mix of technical skills and soft skills, and a lot of those skills are kind of coming from this managerial background. You need to know how to talk with people, how to build relations, how to manage those relations. If you have some entrepreneurship background, be sure to put that in, even if it's totally unrelated to tech, because it tells people that you have a little bit of managerial skills that perhaps could be beneficial for that role. And just a footnote that overall I have 10 years of experience, and 5.5 years of that is in corporate environment. Here is where that actually is very important to bring up. Hey, I know how corporate works. This is where you are going. You're shifting from low-level company to high-level company, and you want to be in that space. Next slide was kind of a trick, a gimmick if you like. It was something that they explicitly asked me to do, right? Tell me about your first 90 days. But I thought that the question isn't really phrased correctly. So, I'm kind of shifting the conversation, changing gears if you like. They wanted to talk about first 90 days, and what usually people do, if you search Google how people approach this problem, they talk about the first hour, not really hour, but first day, first week, a month, and full quarter, because that's essentially what 90 days are. And how I felt about these things is that there will be things that you will start in the first day, but they will last the entire quarter. And there are things that you will start in the third week, and they will be, just a week. And there will be things that essentially you might never complete at all within this time frame. But you as tech lead are supposed to start them and grow them, develop these projects, these things that you will be talking about. And I felt that if you follow this type of framework, you're not gonna get very far, because this will be essentially the same presentation as everybody else will give. So what I've done is I said, okay, first 90 days in Lala cars, this is not something I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is 3 T's. And what 3 T's are? It's a set of steps or things that we are doing. This is team, tech, and talk, or tactic. You see where I'm going with this? It sounds nice. It instantly puts a hook in people's heads, and they are like, is this a sales pitch? And it actually is, because as a candidate, you want to be remembered, and you want to be the one that is on top of their list. There will be plenty of other people who are applying for the same role, because these type of roles pay very well and everybody wants to be there, right? So in order to stand out, you need to come up with creative stuff, and this is it. So 3 T's are essentially the 3 things that I focused on during this presentation. And I thought, you don't need 40 slides. You need 4. Overview, and 3 things that are key that you want to talk about, that you want to highlight. Team, tech, talk. Let's see. Team. The first thing that they told me is, we need to hire 100 people within a year. We have the HR approved headcount and the budget for it. So immediately what you do, you identify risks. And the risk is, you want 100 engineers in the next year. How are you going to do that? That means that you need to hire essentially 2 people every week. You need to give offers, you need to get them approved, you need to get them accepted, and then people have to get onboarded, and that has to grow exponentially. It's not possible to do it, the same way that they are doing it right now. So they are interviewing a candidate a week. So how are you going to sustain that? So this is the first risk. And what you do from there is you identify the risk, and then you figure out how you could potentially mitigate it by, being you in your role. So what I've said is, we need to come up with a flywheel of talent. A flywheel is a buzzword, if you like, that is very popular in Amazon-like circles. And I could immediately tell that the company owner or the founder is very much into Amazon's philosophy and their way of thinking. And I will get back to that why, but this is something to remember. And essentially what that is you need to come up with a process that will streamline this hiring, right? And if you think about it, having a well thought out, fair and consistent process that is quick to execute and quick to, filter candidates if they are meeting the bar or not, and quickly sieve people who are not, essentially not ready for this role, you are able to save a lot of the time by reducing the amount of hours. So, moving on. And again, look how nice this looks. I haven't done anything. I just took a ready slide and just filled it with text, and that's it. Haven't thought twice about layout or anything like that. There was 6 places that you had to fill text. I just came up with 6 ideas. It's important to have many more, but just pick 6 best ones. If I couldn't come up with 6, I would just take 3, because 3 of them seem to be interesting, and you have 3 spots, just go with that. So if you look at the slide, you will notice that the top part is the goals, 3 goals, and 3 matching risks, right? So you kind of have the goal to have strong cross-functional teams, and this is obvious, right? This is a no-brainer. You essentially want teams that are capable of working towards the goal on their own as much as they can, be independent. And every company wants that, right? But if you mention this, that kind of puts you at the right level. Second thing, availability. So of course, when you're transitioning from this software house to your infrastructure, to your teams, you want to make sure that the customer base that you're serving right now is going to stay cared for, right? They will have access to your service. They won't experience any difficulties during that period. It's extremely important. So this is the goal number 2, and it was kind of obvious to mention it again. And the goal number 3 is infrastructure. And again, we want something that we can take care of. It's not only about the software bit, but also the hardware and how it's going to support our scale up. How are we going to grow that? Who's going to take care of it? How it's going to be, SRE level kind of thinking here. And these are essentially the technical bits, but it is the story of ownership, right? It tells you what they want, right? They want to own their thing. They want to own their website, their platform. They want this to be something that is made in-house and not by third-party provider. They want this ownership. So this is how you wrap, put a nice bracket around the whole thing. And then below we have the risks. So risks are kind of obvious, right? You don't know what is the quality of the provided solution. And it's highly likely that with software house, people are just completing stuff so it's done, because if the company is successful, they will want to own this anyway. So they will write their own stuff at some point. So you're just done with it. And if they are not successful, nobody's going to know that the actual software that is inside, that the source code is not really up to par. So this is a potential risk. There is no certainty that the company didn't take care of quality in their code, but I would say it's highly likely. It's highly likely. Slow transition. That's of course a risk. I don't, you just know that. And the last one, set in stone. So it may be that the software is written in a way that is really difficult to transition to on-prem, in-house, or to the cloud, that you're actually owning it. For a couple of reasons. First of all, it's like just negligence, or low standards, or not enough elasticity and designing those things. And second, there is a small chance that this was actually deliberate. That people who have created the software made it so it's difficult to transition, because that's their livelihood, right? Their jobs are tied to that piece of software and supporting this customer. So they don't really have that much incentive to make it easily transitionable to the other, to the customer's infrastructure and have it being owned by the customer, unless that was very explicitly agreed on. I don't know the details of the agreement between the software house and Lala Cars, but I know that these things can potentially happen. And if you think about this, it's kind of obvious, right? So you mentioned these things, and that puts you at the level where you're a person to talk to, right? You understand what's going on. So I presented that, and I could see the jaws of people that are slowly dropping down, down, down. And I really enjoyed the face of the person who started talking to me, like this fast contact recruiter. It's like they haven't seen anything like this. So if you do something like that, you're getting on the very top of this list. Right, and the last bit, the talk. So the talk is really about the communication. So you may have the best tech in the world and the best set of people in the world, and you can pay the best salary in the world. Unless you have a good communication channels that are not broken down, that are healthy, safe, and all that, you won't succeed. So essentially guaranteeing that your communication is top-notch should be the priority of every company. And this is the question or conversation that I wanted to have very early on. What type of company are we building? Of course, they already have a company in place, right? There's hundreds and hundreds of people in there. But the new division that they are building, the tech division, that's to be determined how the processes will work there, what type of atmosphere we want, what type of priority setting and all that. This is totally uncharted area for that company. So it's a really important conversation to have right now. Next up, and I wanted to notice how this goes. I wanted to paste this, right? Not showing the whole slide at this point is very important. First of all, I wanted to talk about these things, like what is the broad vision and all the other stuff, like very general. Next up, what are the culture postulates, or what are the important things that I would suggest as a tech lead that we would implement at this very high level, that we would pay attention to from senior management to the middle management and the line level. How are we going to talk about those things? So Radical Candor is a book about communication. If you haven't read that, consider reading it. How to get what you want by saying what you mean. Kim Scott actually describes the communication methods that have been successful for multiple companies, including Google, which is interesting because, hey, this is where I work now. Kim actually talks about radical candor, and this is something interesting, but maybe for another video. Essentially, radical candor is being honest with people and saying that what you mean in a way that is not offensive or aggressive or something like that, but actually being honest and truthful, so candid. And radical is like actually, getting your message across in a respectable way. We'll talk about that at some point. Anyway, radical candor, overlapped ownership, drivers in the spotlight, gating is frowned upon, and no abandoned components. There's just, common sense things. Just to clarify, what I wanted to have is everybody's an owner. This is a story of ownership. We are owning our new projects that we are building, and there is no such thing as unowned component. And ownership is shared in a way that there is the main owner, and that you are empowered to go into other spaces and fix things. Just make everything as best as you possibly can and feel that you can actually do it, improve stuff. And the last bit, which was really, really tricky, because Lala Cars, believe it or not, they decided to borrow the core principles of the company from Amazon. I'm not joking. They seriously took 10 of Amazon's principles, not all of them, it's more than 10, and they said, Amazon's principles are so good that we will have them as our principles as well. And this didn't sit with me very, very well. I'm sure you can imagine. And I was going back and forth about it. Is this a good thing or a bad thing, right? On one hand, these principles, they work for Amazon very well, obviously. On the other hand, Lala Cars is not Amazon. And what that actually does to Lala Cars may be destructive long term. Because for me as a new joiner, I know that these principles come from Amazon, even if that's not explicitly stated anywhere. And I felt that, are we copycats? Or do we actually have our own identity? Can I actually side with 10 of Amazon's principles as being principles for my company that I'm a part of now, or I am to be a part of? So I wanted to bring up this as something that I really wanted to talk about and highlight as a possible risk in our communication, or something that should be really, it's a really tricky thing to discuss, because every CEO that comes up with their principles, they are not easy thing to change. First of all, because they plaster them on the walls, they paint them, they print posters, and everybody has to learn them and all that. It's a pretty set in stone thing. And of course, changing minds of very high level people, God, it's just, it's extremely difficult challenge. But I feel this was a conversation that we should have at some point. So I brought this up, and this is like, I'm a candidate. And if I bring this stuff up, that should be something, to think about. So it's a mutual, let's say, exploration exercise, because they get to understand how I think about things, and also I get to understand how they react to this type of feedback, what they will do, how they will behave, and if that's important to them to have a conversation. And even if they don't agree, what sort of communication and conversation that is going to be. So it was kind of risky to bring this up, but I did it anyway. And to be totally frank, this was a talking point a long time after my interview has been completed. We came back to this a couple of times in less structured format of communication, and it was really important for them to highlight this. So a really cool move on my part. And what does it tell me is, it might be a good advice to give to you if you have something that doesn't really sit well with you and you want to bring this up during interview, do it. And this was it. I said thank you at this point, and I gave my email, and that's it. It's like, you don't really need to show anything else. It was just a slide that I wanted to fill that was part of this template from PowerPoint. And after that, there was time for questions. So there was a lot of questions, and quite frankly, a lot of them were about communication, because they didn't have too many people that were technical. There were people who were directors of HR, there were people who were directors of finance, of marketing, of sales, all that, and they could talk with me on that level, right? They couldn't talk with me on the technical level, and this wasn't the point. And there was a slide as well that I had hidden or skipped during the presentation, that I had prepared, as like an ace in my sleeve. And this slide is on priorities. So when talking on priorities, that's going to be part of your 90 days, right? What things you should get to at first. And I wanted to borrow this matrix from General Eisenhower, the President of the United States, that this is the matrix that he has essentially came up with to prioritize things. And what you do is you gauge them by importance and urgency. So if a thing is important and urgent, do it. If it's important and not urgent, schedule it. And then if it's urgent and not important, or less important, delegate it. If it's not urgent and not important, just don't do it. And this slide really came in handy, because I was kind of anticipating this type of questions, that they may come. And I wanted to have a visual cue just to go with it. It's like, this cherry on top, that, yeah, I know what you're gonna ask about. Here you go, I was showing this, and exactly this happened. Later on, I had like a couple of minutes discussion with the CEO. The CEO of Lalaka it's a proper, big fish in the sea. And we were discussing things, and among these things there was a question, all right, but what are the priorities? How are you going to manage those? And I wasn't able to answer this question, because nobody is at this point, right? You don't know any single thing about the company, how it works, what are, the inner issues that they don't really want to disclose to candidates at this point. So the question wasn't really about any specific particular thing. It was about you being able to come up with, framework of thinking or matrix like this one. How would you approach different types of problems? And as he was asking this question, because we were, on the VC call, I was able to quickly open up this presentation, share this particular slide, and again, hats off. It was perfect. I couldn't do it any better. And to be totally fair, they were super impressed. That was the feedback I was given, and no wonder, right? Who would it be? Of course, it's me. Of course, joking. But what I wanted to highlight here is, if you're even given similar type of exercise during your interviews or something like that, it doesn't have to be a presentation or always try to think outside of the given frame and try to figure out what will everybody do. And everybody will just, follow what Google says, like how to do 90 days presentations or something like that. And all of them will be exactly the same. But if you say, okay, I know what you're really asking about, it's not this exact question, right? What you will do day after day for 90 days, but how are you thinking about priorities? What are the risks and what are other things? This is what the question is really about, right? Rephrase the question in your head, answer the main question, so you're like on the subject, but also answer all the other questions that haven't been asked. When you do that, you're so far ahead of everybody else that even the best presentation that they may give isn't going to cut it. You're way ahead of everybody else. So with that in mind, this is all I had for you today. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!